We're going to be exploring objects and how you can use the JSON parse and JSON stringify with objects to turn them into strings and then turn them back into editable and updatable objects in JavaScript. JavaScript has built-in methods for handling JSON, and JSON essentially is short for JavaScript Object Notation, so it's really closely related to JavaScript objects. And it's a lightweight way to interchange data, and also human readable, so it's easy to understand. I've created an HTML file, linked it to a JavaScript file. I've selected the page element output, so we have some content that we can output to the page. So first off, let's create our object, and this is going to be a JavaScript object, but once again, we can format it within a format that might be a JSON format, so creating an array, and then within the array, we're going to have a number of objects in there, and these objects are going to be comma separated. So doing the double quotes so that it's also valid JSON. And of course, with JavaScript, you do have more flexibility. You don't have to have the double quotes for it to be valid. And these are named pair values. So we have our name and then the value that's associated with that item. So creating a list of people, and then I'll update the names of them and update the last name. So making sure that we keep the structure the same so that we can easily loop through that object. Let's take a look and we'll see what it looks like within the console. So that's our object that we've just created. And within the console, this gives us the ability to look through those items. And also with the object, we can use the various methods that are built into JavaScript. So going through and looping through all of the object items. We can output the item content, and then we're outputting it within the object format. So if we wanted first name, we can get that within the property name, and last as well, we can get those values returned back. So let's select the output and update the inner HTML. So we'll add to the current inner HTML. I'm using the backticks for the template literals. So let's select the first name, and then we'll select the last name by their property names, and wrap this within a div as we're outputting HTML so that we can clearly see all of them on the page. And I need to also define the main object, which is item, in order to output them on the page. So that gives us that output on the page as we iterate through them. So with the JSON data, there's always a name and a value that's associated, and that's how we can select the content from the object. It can contain various data types, so it can be a combination of different data types such as strings. We can also use numbers, booleans, and this is an array, and then these are objects. So there's different data types that we can do. We can also convert it into text with JavaScript, so there's a method to do that. And if we want to have this as a string value, so just call it string1, we can use the JSON Stringify method and then add the object into the string format. And let's log that into the console, so string1. So that returns it within a string format, and immediately within the console we can see and distinguish the difference between the original object that we can navigate through and look through within the console, and whereas the string, we can't click it, we can't do anything with it. And we also can't do any of the property values. We have to take it as a whole, so it's just being returned back as a regular string. And this has also made a copy of that object. So if we want to bring it back into an object format, we can create an object out of the string. So using the JSON parse method, and that allows us to take the string and turn it back into a usable object. And then now when we output that into the console, we can once again navigate through that object structure. So it is important while it's a string that we don't make any updates to it. So if, for instance, we were to take the string and then string1 and we updated the value of it to include hello, that's going to mess up our JSON parse. So it always has to be a valid way to get the content. And we're not able to update the structure of the JSON object. Otherwise, we'll throw an error into the console. So in addition to that, this being a string makes it fairly easy to output that content into the page. So we can just assign the value of the content and see it within that string format, and which we can't do with just if we had the inner HTML, and if we tried to output the object, we would get this type of structure where we've got the object being named. So there's some benefits to being able to have a string and then just being able to output it directly within your web page. So it's only when it's within the object format that we're able to make updates to it. And the other item to note is that when we reference an object, so if I was to take object and assign a value of object to object2, and then select object2 and return back the first item in the object2, and we'll just console log out that item with an index value of 1. And I got quite a lot of stuff going on in the console, so let's comment out some of these console entries. So if I select the item with the index value of 1, and if I was to take one of the property values such as first and assign a new value to it, or even add a new item into that object. So let's, I'll just call it test. So now our new structure is going to contain test. So that goes for the object as well. So when we select the object, you see that this value has been updated. So even though we're updating object2, it's still tying it together because it's referencing a memory location. And that's why we're able to use const with the objects, because it's not identifying and associating this as a value, it's associating this as an object that can be manipulated and updated. So when we assign one object to another, that establishes a connection and treats them as one and the same. So that's why we can reference the same object location in multiple ways. But when we turn it into a string and turn it back to an object, this one isn't going to get the changes. It's going to remain the same. So if we do this where we're converting it into a string, where we're taking the object and converting it into a string up here at the top, and then we output the value for object 1, even though now it's in an editable object format, it's not tied to the original object or the object2 in any way. So this can work independently.